My wife didn't know that I am an anonymous investor with $10 billion worth of shares in her father's company.
For the outside world, I was just a normal tech person. Secretly, I was the richest person in the city. One day, I checked my wife's phone and found out she was cheating on me. I took revenge by releasing the negative news of her father's company in media. What happened next shocked her entire family.
My name is Adrian Pierce, and until about 3 months ago, I genuinely believed I was living the American dream. Not some glitzy, over-the-top Hollywood version with yachts and private jets, but the quiet, stable version that most people spend their lives striving for. A modest house tucked neatly into the suburbs, a dependable 10-year-old Honda parked in the driveway, a beautiful wife, and an absolutely radiant 7-year-old daughter named Lily who could construct Lego castles that would make any architect question their career choices. I worked as a tech consultant, fixing networks, managing cloud accounts, and occasionally patching servers for clients who didn't realize how much I knew or who I really was. To the casual observer, I was just another middle-class guy, punching the clock, making ends meet, and trying not to spill coffee on his Target-bought shirt. But what they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I was worth roughly $10 billion. 10 billion. With a capital B, I'm the silent, anonymous force behind Morgan Industries, the company that employs half the town and happens to be owned by my father-in-law, Charles Morgan. 5 years ago, the company was on the brink of collapse, losses mounting, layoffs looming, bankruptcy knocking at the door. And then I intervened. Through a web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and financial channels so complex they would make the Panama Papers look like a child's lemonade stand ledger, I injected enough capital to save the company. Not just save it, but transform it into a thriving powerhouse. Why the secrecy? Simple. I wanted to see who people really were when they thought I had nothing to offer them. Natalie, my wife, had no clue. Her parents had no clue. Lily thought her dad fixed computers for a living. And in the eyes of the world, that's exactly what I did. It was the perfect cover. Boring enough that nobody asked too many questions, flexible enough that I could manage a multi-billion-dollar business from anywhere, without ever drawing attention. But lately, things had been different. The spark that once existed between Natalie and me had dimmed, a slow fade that I couldn't ignore any longer. She used to laugh at my jokes, curl up next to me on the couch while Lily built fantastical Lego worlds, and look at me like I was the center of her universe. Even when I came home with grease stains on my shirt, from crawling under a client's desk to fix a network outage, she looked at me with admiration, not annoyance. Now, though, she barely even acknowledged my presence. "Eli, can you pick up Lily from school today?" she called from the bathroom, her voice high-pitched, sing-song, coated in a fake cheerfulness that was all too familiar. She'd been in there for over an hour, probably primping for some meeting she'd tell me was critical. "Sure thing," I replied, not bothering to mention that this was the 4th client meeting she'd conveniently scheduled in the past week alone. I've been married to Natalie for 8 years. I know the difference between her work voice and her lying voice. And right now, she was singing in soprano. When she finally emerged, she looked like she'd just stepped off a magazine cover. Expensive dress, new perfume that made the air shimmer. Hair and makeup meticulously done, every detail calibrated for maximum impact, and all for a 6 o'clock client meeting on a Thursday. I had to acknowledge it. "You look beautiful," I said, because she did, always had. Blonde hair that caught the light just right, green eyes that used to sparkle when they looked at me, a smile that could sell ice to the Eskimos. A woman who could charm her way into any boardroom and had stolen my heart years ago. "Thanks," she said, without looking up from her phone, the device glued to her hand like it contained the secrets of the universe. She typed furiously, a secretive smile playing across her lips, one that made my stomach knot in ways I'd never experienced before. "Who's the client?" I asked casually, trying to mask the tension creeping into my voice. "Just some new fitness company," she said, still staring at her phone. "They want to expand their brand presence." Fitness company, right. I made a mental note to check our credit card statements later. Not because I was worried about money. Hell, I could buy a small country if I wanted. But because patterns were emerging, little threads weaving together a picture I didn't like at all. As she left in a cloud of that expensive perfume, I sat down at my computer. This is what I do best: dig, analyze, uncover the truth. 12 minutes later, I had hacked into her email account. 15 more and I was scrolling through her phone records. What I found made my stomach twist. Dozens of text messages, all to the same number. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Wear that thing I like. He's picking up Lily. We have at least 2 hours. I think about you all day. This is getting dangerous." And the responses, even worse. You deserve better than him, babe. When are you going to leave? I can give you everything he can't. Just say the word. Meet me at the usual place. I'll make you forget all your problems at home. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. 8 years of marriage, a daughter I adored, a life I thought we'd built together. And she was tossing it all away for some gym rat who probably thought literature was the instruction manual for protein powder. But here's the thing about being secretly rich. You learn patience. You learn the long game. You learn that the best revenge isn't quick, hot, or messy. It's slow, calculated, ice cold, served with a smile that hides the storm beneath. My phone buzzed, a text from Natalie. Meeting running super late, don't wait up. Love you, love me, sure. I closed the laptop and drove to pick up my daughter. Lily bounced into the car, backpack dragging behind her, voice bubbling with stories about her day, completely oblivious to the storm brewing at home. She still believed in fairy tales, in happy endings, in the kind of love that could withstand everything. Daddy, can we get ice cream? She asked as I buckled her seat belt. Absolutely, princess. What flavor are you thinking? Chocolate with sprinkles and maybe some gummy bears, she said, eyes wide. Perfect, I replied, smiling. As we drove to the ice cream shop, Lily chattered about her day, about school, about the Lego castle she was going to build next, and I plotted. Natalie wanted to play games. Fine. Let her think she was winning. She had no idea who she was dealing with. The boring middle-class tech consultant she thought she knew. That man had secrets, resources, and patience she could never imagine. And she was about to find out just how far I could go. 2 weeks later, Natalie dropped a bomb over breakfast, still scrolling on her phone. My parents want to have dinner with us this Saturday, she said, not even looking up. Of course, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. They're thinking of some kind of family celebration, she continued. Lily perked up immediately. Grandma and Grandpa's house. With the big staircase? That's right, sweetie, I said, smiling down at her. Natalie finally looked up, but her gaze was entirely on Lily, oblivious to me. And in that moment, I realized something. No matter what game she was playing, no matter what secrets she was hiding, some things were untouchable. My daughter's happiness, our family's heart, that was mine to protect. And protect it I would at any cost. You can play in the garden while the adults talk. Adults talk. I didn't like the sound of that at all. In my experience, whenever the Morgans wanted to talk, it meant someone was about to be politely dismantled, their dignity folded neatly into a linen napkin and set aside with the dessert spoons. Charles and Margaret Morgan were old money, in the purest sense of the term, not just wealthy, established. The kind of people who believed financial struggle was a personal failure, rather than a circumstance. To them, poverty wasn't unfortunate, it was evidence of poor character. They viewed chain stores as symbols of cultural decay, and people who shopped at them as willing accomplices. They had never liked me, which, considering I was the anonymous benefactor who'd quietly saved their empire from collapse, it was almost funny. But they didn't know that. To them, I was simply the blue-collar nobody who had married their daughter and dragged her down into a life of mediocrity. The man who'd supposedly trapped Natalie beneath her station. Sounds great, I said lightly, spreading peanut butter across Lily's toast with deliberate care. Should I wear my good jeans or my really good jeans? Natalie didn't laugh. She used to laugh at my jokes, even the terrible ones, especially the terrible ones. Now she simply watched me, with a measured expression that felt more like evaluation than affection. Maybe something a little more formal, she said carefully. You know how my parents are. Oh, I knew exactly how her parents were. The real question wasn't about dress code, it was about intent. People like the Morgans didn't invite you to dinner for conversation. They invited you for decisions. Saturday arrived with all the anticipation of a root canal. I put on my one decent suit, the same one I'd worn 8 years earlier, when Natalie and I stood before family and friends and promised forever, and tried to ignore how often Natalie checked her reflection in passing windows, mirrors, even the darkened screen of her phone. She wasn't worried about my appearance. She was worried about something else entirely. The Morgan mansion rose from 5 acres of manicured lawn like a monument to generational wealth. Stone columns, sweeping driveway, windows polished to a mirror shine. It was the kind of house designed not just to shelter, but to intimidate. It declared without apology, "We have more money than you ever will." The irony, of course, was that I could have purchased 3 identical properties without so much as glancing at my accounts. Margaret greeted us at the door in pearls and practiced elegance. Her smile was flawless, but hollow like a display model in a department store window. "Adrian, so good to see you," she said. "You look nice." The way she said nice, it sounded suspiciously close to adequate. "Thank you, Mrs. Morgan," I replied evenly. "You look lovely as always." Charles appeared behind her moments later, tall and imposing, in a suit that likely cost more than my first car. He radiated authority the way some men radiated warmth, effortlessly and without apology. "Adrian," he said, extending a firm handshake, "come in, we have quite a bit to discuss tonight." Lily darted past us toward the garden without waiting for permission. Smart kid, she could sense tension the way a seismograph detects tremors. Dinner unfolded exactly as expected. Exquisite food, served on plates that probably had insurance policies. Conversation that hovered somewhere between polite scrutiny and thinly veiled judgment. Charles asked about my computer business, with the indulgent curiosity one might show a child describing a lemonade stand. Margaret inquired about Lily's education, in a tone that suggested public schooling was a temporary inconvenience rather than a legitimate option. Natalie barely touched her food. Her phone remained within reach at all times, lighting up every few minutes. Each time it did, her posture shifted, subtle but noticeable if you knew her as well as I did. The tension was thick enough to slice with the sterling silver steak knife resting beside my plate. Halfway through the main course, Charles set down his fork with deliberate precision and folded his hands in front of him. "Adrian," he said, voice calm and controlled, "I think it's time we had an honest conversation." There it was. "You're a good man," he continued, "and you've been a decent husband to Natalie. But we must be realistic. What situation would that be, sir?" I asked. Charles and Margaret exchanged a glance. Natalie focused intensely on her wine glass. "You're 37 years old," Margaret said gently, as if explaining arithmetic to someone struggling with basic numbers. "You fix computers, you drive a car older than some of the wine in our cellar. It gets excellent gas mileage," I replied evenly. Charles leaned forward slightly. "Natalie is a woman of exceptional ability. She should be leading companies, traveling internationally, building connections that shape industries. Instead, she's living a constrained life, mortgage payments, grocery budgets, suburban limitations. We manage just fine," I said, "though I believe I understand where this conversation is heading." "Do you?" Margaret asked smoothly. "Because from our perspective, it appears you are holding her back." The words settled over the table like smoke. Natalie said nothing. Beneath the table, her fingers moved rapidly across her phone screen. Charles reached into his jacket and withdrew a thick manila envelope. He slid it across the table with practiced confidence. "We'd like to make you an offer," he said. "A generous one." I didn't touch it immediately. "What kind of offer?" "The kind that would allow you to start fresh," Charles replied. "Financial security, opportunity, a chance to build a more suitable life. Perhaps pursue education," Margaret added. "Find someone more aligned with your circumstances. You're offering to pay me to divorce your daughter. We prefer to think of it," Margaret said with effortless poise, "as investing in everyone's future happiness." I opened the envelope. Inside lay a cashier's check for $200,000 and a neatly prepared divorce agreement. Minimal custody, no claim to assets, a clean, efficient severance package for a marriage, $200,000. To them, it was a decisive sum. To me, it was rounding error. I glanced at Natalie. She watched me closely, something complicated flickering behind her eyes. Guilt, yes, but also anticipation, relief. As though she'd been waiting for this exact moment. "This is very generous," I said slowly. Charles smiled, confident in his victory. "I mean," I continued, folding the check and slipping it back into the envelope, "that's a lot of money for someone like me." "It certainly is," Margaret agreed. "I'll need time to consider it." "Of course," Charles said smoothly, "within reason." I stood, smoothing my jacket. "Thank you for dinner and for your transparency. It's been enlightening." Natalie blinked, confusion replacing composure. "Eli, we haven't had dessert yet." "I'm not really in the mood for something sweet," I replied calmly. I turned toward the garden. "Lily," I called gently, "time to go, princess." And with that, I walked away from the table, carrying their offer in my pocket and a very different plan forming quietly in my mind. The drive home unfolded in a strange, fragile quiet that felt less like peace and more like the calm before something inevitable. Lily filled the silence with bright, breathless commentary about the Morgan's garden. Specifically the Koi Pond, which in her estimation was the single greatest body of water ever constructed by human hands. They had orange ones and white ones, and this huge one that looked like it was in charge of all the others, she said from the back seat, legs swinging. "Do you think fish have leaders, Daddy?" "Some of them probably like to think they do," I replied, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Natalie said nothing. She stared out the passenger side window as the streetlight streaked across the glass, her reflection flickering in brief, ghost-like intervals. I wondered what she was thinking. Whether she believed I would take the money and quietly disappear. Whether she was already calculating her next move if I refused. When we got home, Lily insisted on showing us the drawing she'd made of the mansion garden, complete with exaggerated fish and a son that smiled down on everything. We praised her work, tucked her into bed, and lingered just long enough to make sure she drifted into sleep without sensing the tension humming beneath the house's surface. Only when her door clicked shut did Natalie finally speak. "So," she said carefully, "what are you thinking?" "About what?" I asked, though I knew. "About what my parents offered." I sat down on the couch and studied her properly. The woman in front of me was still undeniably beautiful. Blonde hair perfectly arranged, posture controlled, expression measured, but there was something new behind her eyes, something deliberate, something that weighed every word before releasing it. Or perhaps it wasn't new at all. Perhaps I had simply refused to see it before. "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that your parents aren't the only ones who have been planning this conversation." She had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Eli, how long what? How long have you been planning to get rid of me?" I asked quietly. "How long have you been coordinating with your parents and your boyfriend? How long have you been lying to me and pretending this is still a marriage?" Her face drained of color. "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone and opened the screenshots I had saved. Messages, plans. Promises whispered through glowing screens. "Really?" I said, holding the display where she could see it. "Because I think you know exactly what I'm talking about." She stared at the screen as if language itself had betrayed her. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. When she finally spoke, the accusation came not as denial but deflection. "You went through my phone?" "I'm a tech consultant," I said evenly. "It's literally my profession." "You had no right." "I had every right. I was your husband, until tonight, apparently, when I became a negotiable inconvenience." She stood abruptly, hands trembling despite her attempt to remain composed. "You don't understand," she said. "It's not what you think." "Then explain it." She hesitated. The silence that followed was more revealing than any confession. "You're in love with him," I finished. She didn't deny it. That told me everything. "Fine," I said, rising slowly. "You want out, you've got it, but we're doing this my way." Her eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" I smiled. Not the polite smile I wore for clients or neighbors, but something quieter, sharper. "It means," I said calmly, "you have absolutely no idea who you're dealing with, Natalie, but you're about to find out." The next morning, I didn't go to the spare bedroom where I supposedly ran my modest consulting business. Instead, I drove downtown to a gleaming glass tower that pierced the skyline like a declaration of intent. My office occupied a discreet suite on the 38th floor. The plaque on the door read, "Pierce Consulting." Technically accurate. I did consult, just not on malfunctioning routers and home networks. My assistant, Janet, greeted me with a cup of coffee and a stack of neatly organized reports. She was one of only 3 people who knew the truth about me. Loyalty, when properly valued, becomes remarkably consistent. "Good morning, Mr. Pierce," she said. "Morning, Janet." "Anything unusual?" "The Morgan Industries quarterly reports are on your desk," she replied, "and there have been some irregularities in their marketing division." I raised an eyebrow. "Natalie Pierce has been using company resources for meetings that don't appear in billing records, conference rooms reserved without client files, company credit card charges at restaurants and hotels unrelated to any documented business activity." Of course she had. "My wife," I said quietly, "is conducting her affair on corporate funds." "Indirectly yours," Janet noted. The irony was almost elegant. "Anything else?" Apex Fitness owner Miles Carr has been calling repeatedly, requesting direct contact with Mrs. Pierce. So, that was his name. "Persistent men often reveal their weaknesses through impatience," I murmured. "Thank you, Janet." I retreated to my office and opened my laptop. If emotion is heat, money is ice, and I preferred ice. Morgan Industries was my creation. 5 years earlier, it had been collapsing under catastrophic mismanagement. I had acquired majority ownership through a latticework of investment vehicles so complex that even regulators struggled to trace the origin. Then I rebuilt everything: structure, supply chains, markets. Today, the company was valued at over $15 billion. The Morgans believed they commanded it. In reality, they were salaried stewards of my investment. Charles occupied the CEO office because I permitted it. Margaret hosted charity galas funded by dividends I authorized. Their mansion, their lifestyle, their influence, all of it rested on foundations they didn't know I controlled. And now they wanted to pay me to disappear. I turned my attention to Miles Carr. It took 20 minutes to map his finances. By the end of it, I laughed aloud. Apex Fitness was a failing enterprise propped up by borrowed optimism. Massive expansion loans, declining membership revenue, lease payments overdue, equipment financing in default, tax liabilities accumulating like storm clouds. He wasn't ambitious. He was desperate. No wonder he had attached himself to Natalie. He believed proximity to the Morgan fortune would solve his problems. He just didn't realize the fortune wasn't theirs to give. My phone vibrated. A message from Natalie. Can we talk when you get home? I think we need to discuss things like adults. Adults. I stared at the words for a moment, then typed my reply, sure, looking forward to it. I set the phone aside and leaned back in my chair, watching the city stretch endlessly beyond the glass. Natalie wanted a conversation. What she didn't realize was that the conversation had already begun. And this time, I would be the one setting the terms. I spent the rest of the day doing what I do best, moving pieces no one else even realizes are on the board. The work required no dramatic gestures, no raised voices, no visible confrontation, just a handful of precisely timed phone calls to people who understood the language of influence, a series of carefully composed emails sent to investors who prided themselves on reading between the lines. And for good measure, a discreet tip passed to a financial blogger whose entire career was built on sniffing out corporate whispers before they became headlines. By 5 o'clock, the mechanism was primed. The first domino leaned forward, waiting only for gravity to do its job. Then, I did what I always did. I went home. My 10-year-old Honda rattled comfortably as I pulled into the driveway of the modest suburban house that defined my public identity. The lawn needed mowing, the porch light flickered occasionally. It was the picture of ordinary life. Inside, Lily collided with me in a joyful tackle hug that nearly knocked me off balance. "Daddy, I built a castle today. Come see." Her excitement was infectious. I followed her into the living room, where an elaborate Lego fortress occupied the coffee table like a miniature kingdom. Towers rose from every corner. Walls were reinforced. A functional drawbridge hung over an imaginary moat. "That's incredible," I said honestly. "Did you design it yourself?" "Mostly," she replied proudly, "but I looked up real castles online. Did you know some kings built secret passages so they could escape if bad guys attacked?" "I didn't," I said. "That's very strategic." "Mommy says dinner's almost ready," she added. "She made your favorite." Of course she did. Natalie only cooked pot roast when she wanted something. Usually forgiveness, sometimes compliance. I found her in the kitchen stirring a pot with deliberate focus. The smell of slow-cooked beef and herbs wrapped around the room like a memory of simpler days. She wore an apron and a practiced smile that trembled just slightly at the edges. "Smells good," I said. "I thought we could have a family dinner," she replied softly. "Just the three of us. Like old times, before you started sleeping with your personal trainer." She flinched, but didn't argue progress. "Eli," she said quietly, "I know you're angry." "Angry?" I laughed gently. "No, I'm disappointed. There's a difference." She set down the wooden spoon, hands gripping the counter as if she needed something solid beneath them. "I never meant for this to happen." "Which part?" I asked. "The affair or getting caught?" "Neither." "Are you in love with him?" The question settled between us with the weight of something irreversible. She searched the floor, the ceiling, anything but my face. "I think so," she whispered. "You think so?" I repeated. "That's a fascinating level of uncertainty for something that's dismantling a marriage. It's complicated." "No," I said calmly. "It isn't. You either love him or you don't. You either want this family or you don't." Her voice sharpened. "I care about our family." "From where I'm standing," I said, "it looks like you care more about his approval than your daughter's stability." "That's not fair." "You're right," I replied. Fair would have been honesty, fair would have been respect. Tears gathered in her eyes. "I'm sorry. For which part?" "For everything." I shook my head slowly. "You didn't make mistakes, Natalie. You made decisions." She swallowed hard. "What happens now?" I picked up the envelope her father had given me. The cashier's check, the divorce papers, I held them where she could see. "I'm going to sign," I said. Relief flooded her face so quickly, it was almost painful to witness. "Really?" "Yes," I said evenly, "but there's a small problem." I tore the check cleanly down the middle, then again, the fragments drifted to the floor. "I don't want their money," I said. "I don't need it." Her confusion was immediate and genuine. "I don't understand." "You will." From the living room, Lily called out. "Dinner. We should eat," I said. "It may be our last peaceful one for a while." We sat at the table as Lily animatedly explained defensive architecture and siege strategies. Natalie barely touched her food. I watched them both and committed the moment to memory, the ordinary rhythm of a family on the edge of transformation. Because, by morning, everything would change. Monday opened with impact. "Morgan Industries under investigation for accounting irregularities," announced the Wall Street Journal headline before the market had fully stabilized. By 10 o'clock, the stock had dropped 15%. By noon, 30%. By closing bell, nearly half the company's market value had evaporated into speculation and fear. The elegance of financial warfare lies in its invisibility. No accusations, no conclusions. Just questions placed in the right ears, documents framed in suggestive ways, curiosity nudged into motion. Even spotless books become suspicious when enough people start looking at them closely. I sat in my office, watching the numbers cascade downward across multiple monitors. A quiet, methodical unraveling. Janet's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Pierce, Charles Morgan is on line 1. He sounds distressed." I allowed myself a small smile. "Put him through." "Adrian," Charles's voice trembled with controlled panic. "I need to ask you something, and I need absolute honesty." "Of course," I said mildly. "How can I help?" "The stock price. We're being hammered. There are rumors about investigations, accounting issues, potential fraud. The board is in emergency session. Reporters are calling nonstop." "That sounds very stressful. Did you speak to anyone about our conversation Saturday night?" "Anyone at all?" I leaned back in my chair, gazing at the skyline. "I'm not sure what you mean." "The timing," he pressed. "It can't be coincidence." "Mr. Morgan," I said calmly, "I fix computers for a living." Silence filled the line. On my screen, another percentage point disappeared. The first domino had fallen, and this was only the beginning. "I wouldn't even know who to talk to about something like that," I said calmly into the phone. There was a long pause on the other end, not the comfortable kind of silence, but the strained, searching kind, like a man feeling around in the dark for a door that no longer exists. "Right," Charles finally replied. His voice had lost its usual polished certainty. "Of course, I'm grasping at straws here. This all came out of nowhere." "I'm sure it will work out," I said gently. "These things usually do." We exchanged a few more empty pleasantries before the call ended. When the line went dead, I set the phone down and allowed myself exactly 10 seconds of satisfaction. No more. Emotional indulgence, like any luxury, is best consumed sparingly. Then I got back to work. Phase 2 required something less abstract than market pressure. It needed proximity. It needed presence. It needed the human element. So I drove across town to Apex Fitness. The building announced itself with aggressive confidence: glass facade, oversized signage, and windows designed to display sculpted bodies like merchandise. It was the kind of place that treated sweat as a status symbol, a temple dedicated to physical perfection and personal branding. I parked my aging Honda between a pristine BMW and a gleaming Mercedes. The contrast amused me. 3 vehicles, 3 different stories about success. Only one of them was honest. Inside, the gym smelled exactly as expected: sweat, rubber, protein powder, and ambition, thick enough to taste. Chrome equipment gleamed beneath unforgiving fluorescent lighting. Mirrors covered every wall, multiplying muscle and ego in equal measure. Posters featuring impossibly defined bodies proclaimed slogans about discipline, dominance, and transformation. In the center of it all stood Miles Carr. He was impossible to miss: tall, tan, perfectly proportioned. The kind of physique sculptors once worshipped and marketing departments now monetized. He moved with effortless authority, leading a group fitness class with theatrical enthusiasm. His voice boomed over pounding music, every instruction delivered with the conviction of a motivational speaker addressing a stadium. He was everything I was not. I waited patiently until the class ended. Participants dispersed, flushed and breathless, while Miles basked in their admiration like a preacher after a sermon. At the front desk, I addressed the receptionist, a young woman whose energy suggested she subsisted entirely on kale smoothies and optimism. "I'd like to speak with Miles Carr about personal training," I said. "Of course," she replied brightly. "He's our best trainer." I didn't doubt that for a moment. Miles approached with confident strides, wiping his hands on a towel. His smile was practiced but effective, the expression of a man accustomed to being admired on sight. "Hey there," he said warmly. "I'm Miles, looking to get in shape." "Something like that," I replied, extending my hand. "Adrian Pierce." His handshake was firm, deliberate, an attempt at dominance disguised as enthusiasm. "Great to meet you, Adrian. What are your fitness goals?" "Well," I said thoughtfully, "I'm going through a bit of a life transition. My wife and I are getting divorced. I figured it might be time to work on myself. Become the kind of man who deserves better." Something shifted behind his eyes, subtle but unmistakable. "Divorce is tough," he said carefully, "but sometimes things happen for a reason." "Absolutely," I agreed. "Sometimes you discover the person you married isn't who you thought they were." He nodded slowly. "My wife actually recommended you," I continued casually. "Natalie Morgan." "Well, Natalie Pierce for now." The color drained from his face so quickly it was almost impressive. "She mentioned me?" he asked. "Oh yes," I said. "She spoke very highly of your techniques." He glanced around the gym as if searching for witnesses or escape routes. "Listen," he said cautiously, "I think there might be some misunderstanding." "Is there?" I asked softly, "because I was under the impression you'd been providing my wife with very personal training sessions. Often after hours." "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone and displayed a series of screenshots. Really? He stared at the screen, jaw tightening. For a moment, he said nothing. When he finally looked up, defiance had replaced panic. I didn't plan for this, he said. It just happened. What exactly happened, Miles? Natalie and I connected. She was unhappy. I was there for her. Connected, I repeated thoughtfully. Naturally, he nodded as if that explained everything. How long has this natural development been progressing? A few months. How many months? He hesitated. 6. Maybe 7. 7 months. 7 months of quiet betrayal. 7 months of ordinary dinners and bedtime routines built on a foundation of deception. And you knew she was married. Yes, but... And you knew she had a child. I'm not the bad guy here, he said defensively. She told me everything, said you'd grown apart, said she felt trapped. Trapped, I echoed. I just gave her what she wasn't getting at home. What she wasn't getting, I repeated. And what would that be? Passion, excitement. A real future. I nodded slowly. And in your professional assessment, I asked, who exactly is she? His chest expanded as confidence returned. She's incredible, smart, beautiful, ambitious. She deserves someone who can keep up with her, someone who can give her the life she wants. The life she wants, I said. You mean money? I mean everything, he insisted. Travel, opportunities, security. She shouldn't be worrying about bills. And you intend to provide all that? I will, he said firmly. I studied him for a moment, the certainty almost admirable. Interesting, I said. Because from what I understand, Apex Fitness is experiencing certain financial challenges. His expression faltered. That's temporary, he said quickly. Expansion requires risk. Of course, loans, taxes. Lease payments. His silence confirmed what I already knew. I hear you've been discussing potential investment with Natalie's father. He straightened slightly. We've had conversations. Of course they had. Miles believed he was ascending into wealth. Charles believed he was acquiring a convenient replacement. Natalie believed she was securing a future. They all believed the same illusion, and none of them understood the simplest truth. They were negotiating with a man they thought they could discard. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. Well, Miles, I said pleasantly, I wish you the best of luck, truly. It's a beautiful plan, I said conversationally, studying Miles with polite curiosity, except for one small detail. He frowned. Irritation flashed across his face. What detail? That's interesting, I continued calmly, especially considering that Charles Morgan's company lost roughly $2 billion in market value today. Miles blinked, the words landing without meaning. What, you really haven't seen the news? I asked, tilting my head slightly. Morgan Industries is in free fall, accounting irregularities, federal inquiries, investors panicking. It's all over the financial channels. Very messy situation. That's not possible. Check your phone. He did. The transformation was almost theatrical. Confidence drained from his expression in measurable stages, confusion, disbelief, denial, and finally, the dawning comprehension of consequences. His thumb moved frantically across the screen as headline after headline confirmed what he desperately wanted to dismiss. This doesn't change anything, he said at last, though conviction had abandoned him. Doesn't it? I asked gently. Because I'm fairly certain Natalie won't seem quite so appealing once her trust fund evaporates and her father's empire starts collapsing. You don't know what you're talking about, he snapped. Maybe not, I conceded. But I do know my wife better than you do, and I know what happens when comfort disappears, when security vanishes. She'll start looking for stability somewhere else, someone with stronger prospects than a failing gym owner who can't cover his lease payments. Miles stepped closer, attempting intimidation through proximity. His size might have impressed someone else, it didn't impress me. You think you're pretty smart, don't you? I think I understand patterns, I replied evenly. You're broke, she's restless, you needed opportunity, she needed excitement. It was convenient for both of you. The only problem is convenience doesn't survive bankruptcy. I don't have to listen to this. No, I agreed. You don't, but you should start thinking carefully about your future. The financial lifeline you believed was waiting for you just snapped. I turned toward the exit, then paused as though remembering something trivial. Oh, and Miles, if I were you, I'd begin exploring alternative career options. The fitness industry is about to become very competitive. Behind me, I could already hear him dialing frantically, voice sharp with urgency. He would call Natalie first, then Charles, then anyone capable of denying reality. But reality is remarkably persistent, and this was only the beginning. By Wednesday morning, my phone had become a museum of missed calls. 17 from Natalie, Tuesday night alone, 12 from her parents, 3 from numbers I recognized as corporate contacts. Even Miles had tried twice, though I couldn't imagine what he hoped to accomplish. Apology, negotiation, threat. I ignored them all. Instead, I spent the evening on the living room floor building Lego castles with Lily. She explained defensive architecture with solemn authority, completely unaware that the foundations of her mother's world were cracking in real time. Her laughter filled the house with a kind of fragile normalcy that felt almost sacred. Meanwhile, financial media was devouring the Morgan story with gleeful intensity. Analysts speculated, commentators debated, headlines multiplied. Words like investigation, liability, and exposure appeared with increasing frequency. The stock price had stabilized, but only because there was very little distance left to fall. I was reviewing updated reports in my real office when Janet's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Pierce, there's a woman here to see you. She says she's your wife." Interesting. Natalie had never been here. She didn't know this office existed. "Send her in," I said. She entered cautiously, as if stepping into unfamiliar territory, which, in every meaningful sense, she was. Her appearance had changed dramatically. Perfect composure replaced by exhaustion. Designer elegance replaced by practicality. Her hair was pulled back carelessly. Her eyes were ringed with sleeplessness. She stopped just inside the doorway, taking in the panoramic view, the sleek furniture, the wall of live market feeds. "What is this place, Eli?" "This," I replied calmly, "is where I work. But I thought your computer business is one of several interests." "Sit down." She lowered herself onto the chair across from me, posture tense, hands clasped tightly together. "I don't understand what's happening," she whispered. "What part confuses you?" "All of it. My father's company is collapsing. Reporters are calling nonstop. Miles won't answer me. And now I discover you have an office that looks like it belongs to a Fortune 500 executive." I leaned back slightly. "What would you like to know?" She met my eyes, searching for something familiar and failing to find it. "I want to know who you really are." "I'm your husband," I said quietly, "or at least I was." "Don't joke," she pleaded. "Not now." "You're right," I said. "This isn't amusing." Her gaze drifted toward the monitors where numbers shifted continuously. "Are you some kind of traitor? Something like that? And you never told me? Would it have mattered?" "Yes," she insisted. "If I'd known you were successful, if I'd known you had money, you would have what?" I asked gently. "Loved me differently. Respected me differently, remained faithful." She lowered her eyes, shame flickering across her face. "That's not what I meant." "Isn't it?" I asked, "because it sounds very much like you're saying my value depended on my bank balance. That's not fair." "Fair," I repeated quietly. "Your parents offered to purchase my disappearance. You allowed it. You planned a future with someone who believed your family's wealth would rescue his failing business. And now you want to discuss fairness?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I made mistakes." "Stop calling them mistakes," I said softly. "They were decisions." She swallowed hard. "Fine, I made bad decisions, but I want to fix this. I want to make things right." "How?" "I'll end things with Miles. I'll tell my parents to stop. We can go to counseling. We can repair this." "What exactly are we repairing?" I asked. "What was broken before the affair?" She opened her mouth, then hesitated. "Was I a bad husband?" I continued. "A bad father? Did I fail to love you? Fail to support you?" She couldn't answer. "The truth," I said quietly, "is that nothing was broken. You were bored. You wanted novelty. You wanted intensity. You wanted to feel extraordinary." She looked at me helplessly. "I thought I deserved more." "You already had more," I replied gently. "You just didn't recognize it." Silence settled between us, heavy and irreversible. Outside the window, the city continued its relentless motion. Markets shifting, fortunes rising and falling, lives intersecting without awareness of consequence. Natalie studied my face as if seeing a stranger. "Who are you?" she whispered again. I held her gaze steadily. "Someone you underestimated." And for the first time since she entered the room, she seemed to understand that the life she believed she was controlling had never truly been hers to command. "Instead of talking to me about what you were feeling, about the restlessness, the dissatisfaction, the hunger for something more, you chose silence. And then you chose distance. And finally, you chose someone else." "I'm sorry," Natalie whispered. "I know you are," I replied quietly. "But being sorry doesn't rebuild trust. It doesn't rewind time. It doesn't erase choices." She swallowed, her voice small. "Then what does?" I didn't answer immediately. I rose from my chair and walked to the window, letting the height of the building place a comfortable distance between us. The city stretched below in neat grids of movement and light, cars threading through intersections, people hurrying along sidewalks, lives unfolding without pause or sympathy. It looked orderly from above, predictable, manageable. Relationships, I had learned, were none of those things. "Nothing fixes this, Natalie," I said at last. "What's done is done." Behind me, I heard the shift of fabric as she stood. "So that's it. You're just going to give up on us?" "I'm not giving up," I said, still facing the glass. I'm accepting reality. There's a difference. You don't love me anymore. Maybe you never did. Maybe what you loved was the idea of a husband, a house, a family, the performance of stability. That's not true. I turned then, meeting her gaze directly. Then tell me why you cheated. Her lips parted, closed, parted again. Because you thought you deserved more, I finished gently. Because you believed I was holding you back. Because you convinced yourself you could do better than a quiet man with a modest life. Eli, the irony, I continued, walking slowly back toward my desk, is almost poetic. You ended our marriage because you believed I wasn't enough for you. But the truth is, Natalie, I was far more than you ever realized. She stared at me, confusion deepening. I don't understand. I know, I said softly. That's the point. I opened a drawer and removed a thick folder. Inside were documents arranged with deliberate care, financial statements, ownership records, corporate filings. I spread them across the polished surface of the desk, turning each page so she could see clearly. I own 65% of your father's company, I said evenly. I'm the investor who saved Morgan Industries when it was weeks away from collapse. Every luxury your family has enjoyed for the past 5 years exists because of me. She blinked, the information refusing to settle. That's impossible. The mansion your parents live in, purchased through one of my holding companies, the vehicles in their driveway, leased under my corporate guarantees, their charity galas, their travel, their investments, funded by capital I provided. Her voice trembled. How, you're just a computer technician, I supplied calmly. Just a man who couldn't possibly have built a multi-billion-dollar portfolio. I met her eyes without hostility, only clarity. 10 billion, I added quietly, give or take a fluctuation or two. She sank into the chair as if gravity had suddenly increased. I don't believe you. I pressed the intercom button. Janet, please bring in the Morgan ownership documents, the ER Holdings file. Yes, Mr. Pierce. A minute later, Janet entered with another folder thicker than the first. She placed it on the desk and departed without comment, her professionalism immaculate as always. ER Holdings, I explained, opening it. Adrian Pierce Holdings, the controlling entity behind Morgan Industries. Natalie lifted one of the pages with trembling fingers. This says you own 65% controlling interest, I confirmed. Which means I could remove your father as CEO with a single directive. I could liquidate assets, restructure the company, or dismantle it entirely. Her voice was barely audible. Why are you telling me this now? Because you wanted to know who I really am, I said, and because you believed I was disposable. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. But why didn't you tell me before? Because I wanted to know who you were when you thought I had nothing, I replied quietly. And now I do. She covered her mouth, sobbing openly. Eli, please, we can fix this. We can start over. I shook my head. I love the woman I thought you were, I said gently, but she doesn't exist. I'm still me, she insisted. I'm still the woman you married. The woman I married wouldn't have betrayed our marriage, I answered. She wouldn't have collaborated in humiliating me. She would have talked to me when she felt lost. I can change. You shouldn't have to change, I said. You should have been honest from the beginning. I moved around the desk and sat on its edge, close enough that she could see the absence of anger in my expression. There was no fury left, only finality. Here's what happens now, I said calmly. I signed the divorce papers your father provided. You received the freedom you wanted. I don't want freedom anymore, she cried. Yes, I replied gently. You do, you just don't want the consequences. What consequences? You'll learn soon enough. Think about Lily, she pleaded. Think about our family. I am thinking about her, I said softly. She deserves honesty, stability, at least one parent who chooses integrity when it matters. Her expression hardened. You're going to take her away from me. I'm not taking anything, I replied. But I will ensure she understands truth from deception. She stood abruptly, anger replacing desperation. You can't destroy everything because you're hurt. My feelings aren't the issue, I said quietly. Trust is, respect is. Commitment is. You never told me who you really were. You never asked, I replied. Silence stretched between us, heavy with recognition. When was the last time you asked what I wanted from life? I asked gently. When was the last time you looked at me and saw a person instead of a limitation? She had no answer. Go home, Natalie, I said at last. Pack your things, stay with your parents, stay with Miles, stay wherever you choose. But understand this clearly, we are finished. You're making a mistake. I held her gaze steadily. No, I said, marrying you was the mistake, accepting the truth is the correction. She stood there for a long moment, as if waiting for me to change my mind. When I didn't, she turned and walked toward the door. Her steps were unsteady, each one carrying the weight of consequences she had never imagined facing. When the door closed behind her, the office grew very quiet. I returned to the window and looked out across the city once more. Nothing had changed outside. Traffic moved. Lights flickered on. Life continued with indifferent momentum, but something inside me had shifted irrevocably. The pretense was over. The illusion had dissolved. The man she believed she could discard no longer existed, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace.